You're on live.
Okay, thanks. Hello and welcome to day 4 of our webinar series. It's an honor and pleasure to be with you to take you through today's presentation. My name is Sujata Bhonsale. I'm the academic manager for the British Council in North India, based out of the New Delhi office. On day 2, my colleague Rebecca focused on how to improve your students' communication skills. In today's webinar, it is an extension of that session, but we will look at more practical ways in which we can improve your students' participation and interaction in speaking activities using English. So let's first look at the learning outcomes of this session. Anu, Haima, I'm not able to see the slide. Is it visible?
No, not yet. Haima, can you pull up the slide, please?
I've gone back to the title slide for those who are joining us now.
Yeah, it's up now. Can you see?
Yes, thank you. So by the end of today's sessions, you will be able to recognize the benefits of pair work and group work in maximizing student interaction, describe a few techniques to increase oral communication in the classroom, adapt reading tasks to make them more communicative, understand and address challenges in pair and group work. So let's begin. On the screens here are some images. These are images of the dominant classroom interaction patterns that we see in our classrooms. Can you identify some of these? For example, image number 3 or picture number 3 is, I can see two students working together. It's an image of pair work. Can you look at 1 and 2 and tell us what is the interaction pattern here?
You can type your answers in the chat box.
Are you familiar with any of this? If yes, you can type Y in the chat. You can type N if you're not familiar with any. I hope you all can see our screen clearly. Okay, so image number 1 is where a teacher is talking to the students. That's the usual pattern that we see in across classrooms. Image 2 is where students are working together in groups. While 3, as I said, is an image of students working in a pair.
So there are some responses on the chat. So some of them are saying group study, some of them are saying lecture mode. So
absolutely,
there are
fantastic.
It's coming through now.
Okay, great. And many of you also saying yes, that you are aware of these interaction patterns. That's really nice. A conversation is happening. Yes, Niranjan, thank you. Group study, absolutely. Right. So it looks like many of you are familiar with these interaction patterns. Uh, do you think student to student interaction pattern is desirable? Students working in pairs or groups, is it desirable? If you think yes, then can you type Y in the chat box? But if you think this is something that you are not able to do or are not inclined to do, you could type N or no. Okay, I saw someone's reply that said one is a presentation. Okay. For those of you who are joining us just now, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for being here. We are looking at slide number 1 and looking at some interaction patterns. Right. Okay, so it is desirable to have students interacting with each other because it increases their participation in classroom activities. It gives them more practice for listening and speaking, and it helps in collaborative learning together. Uh, because when they learn together, there's more meaningful practice of language. And when that happens, then it increases student motivation. So it is always desirable that we encourage more pair work and group work. Okay, so in continuation with that, in today's session, we will look at some techniques for promoting speaking. What can what can we do to encourage students speaking in the classroom? Before we move on to those techniques, do you use any activities that increase student participation in the classroom? Are there any activities that you do with your students? Can you type Y or N in the chat? Okay. Right. So the first technique that we are going to talk about is a ball throwing activity. It's a very simple activity and a low resource one. The teacher needs a ball for this. She uses a ball which she then throws to a learner or a student who has to say something. For example, it could be an introduction that the student has to give, along with some additional information like her favorite hobby. The student then throws the ball to someone else who has to speak. So when she throws the ball to someone else in the classroom or in a group, that person has to then give his or her introduction and then talk about what is their favorite hobby. Now this continues until everyone has had a chance to say something. And so we could use this activity, say, for example, for introduction, as I said, or perhaps it could be around a question of what are your future plans? So as the teacher throws the ball to a student, student one first responds, student one throws the ball to student two, and she gives her response, and so on, so forth, until everyone in the class has had a chance to say something about it. Another activity or technique that you can use is called onion rings. Now for this activity, you would require some space. So you will require, say, the front of your classroom perhaps, or if you have the opportunity to, you could also take your students outside to do this. In this activity, say, for example, if your class strength is of 40 students, you can divide the class into two. One half stands in a circle facing outwards. The other half stands in a larger circle around them facing inwards. So these are two concentric circles where the students are facing each other. The teacher will give 2 or 3 minutes to ask and answer as many questions as possible. So what are these? What are the kinds of questions? It could be something from your textbooks, say questions that the students in the inner circle have to ask, and the students in the outer circle will answer. Then the outer circle will have to move to the next learner. So it is only the outer circle that moves, and you will stop the activity when they have all come a full circle, when they come back to the first student where they started off. So to understand it better, here is an image of the two circles, or what we call onion rings. It reminds you of, you know, the rings in an onion that go when you cut them cross in a cross section, you can see these rings. So we call them onion rings. This is a technique that you can use for, say, practicing functional language. I'm sure some of this would have been focused on in our session on communication, where we use functional language to use language to achieve something. So for example, you can give students a situation about giving advice, asking for advice and giving advice. That could be a reason. Or you could give another example could be asking for information. This could be in a situation where students are, say, visiting a shop or a mall and asking about the price of something that they see.
So Sujata, they have put up some of the teachers have put up some suggestions like storytelling, role plays.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Those are very good suggestions. Thank you very much for that. Role plays can be done through the onion ring activity, making it really very interesting. The important thing about both these activities is that you could do this not only just for your English language lessons. Do you think you can do this for in some of your other subjects where you are teaching through the medium of English perhaps? You can type a Y or an N in the chat to let us know. Right. So for those of us who are joining us now, and if you can see the screens, these are two techniques that we have talked about for promoting speaking. The question here was, can you use these techniques in other classes? Ice-breaking activity, absolutely. Thank you very much, Fairoj. Thank you for that.
So Rafiq says, I have made students to interact in pair while making them practice language functions. So they seem to be using some of these techniques already.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that, Rafiq. Right. Another technique that you could use to promote speaking is this one, a pyramid discussion. Now you want your students to give you a list of the 5 most important things to prepare for the exams. As a teacher, you will put up this list of 10 items, 10 most important things on the board. And you now want your students to give you the 5 most important things after from this. So how can you do this? The image here is a clue on how you can do this so that you involve all your students in this discussion. You begin with making a student pairs. So you get 2 students together and they discuss and finalize their list of 5 things, 5 important things to prepare for the exams. All students will discuss this once with their partners in their pairs. After, say, around 2 minutes or so, the teacher will then bring 2 pairs together. That means you will have a group of 4 students who will now get together, discuss the list of 5 that they have, and decide a final list of 5 from that list. After some time, this group of 4 is then put together with another group of 4. So the group of 8 then gets together and tries to decide what are the 5 most important things to prepare for the exams. For example, during a discussion, student A and B have listed these 5 things. If you see here, student P and Q, for example, have decided another list. When these 2 pairs get together, they may prepare, after discussing, they will prepare another list of 5. So in this way, as you see, all students get an opportunity to discuss and put their list together. And finally, the whole class, the whole group gets together and puts out the final list of 5 for the class. So this is a technique which can be used for, say, problem solving. Here, of course, the teacher has given this as a topic for discussion, perhaps in an English language class. But do you think you can do this in some of your other subjects? Perhaps science? Or maybe even history? Now, I'm sure many of you are wondering, how can you support your students when they are together in pairs or groups? How can you support them when they are having these discussions? So at the outset, one way of doing this is by putting up the language for discussion on the board. For example, when students want to ask each other, what do you think about something? They could say, I think, I believe, I don't think so. And this is the language for agreeing or disagreeing. I agree or I don't agree with you. That's right, wrong, I don't think so. I don't believe that's true. They may not always agree in a discussion. They can ask a question from each other. What do you think? What do you mean? What are you trying to say? By giving this language for discussion beforehand, say perhaps the teacher can put this up on the board before the activity itself. The teacher can get together and brainstorm some of this language with the students, ask the students for this language and put them up on the board so that the students can look at it and use them in their discussions. Do you think supporting your students in this way will be helpful? You can type a simple yes or a no in the chat to let us know. I could see a question that said difference between two. Anu, could you differences between two? I'm not sure about this question here. Anyway, you can ask us again if you can expand on that in the chat again, and we could come back to it in the end when we take your questions. Right. Okay. So here are some more techniques that you could use for maximizing interaction. I think some of you have talked about role plays. I could see that in the chat. Another activity or technique that you could use are class surveys. Now, this table here below that you see is a table that is an activity where students have to find out how their classmates travel to school. So in groups with this table, this could be a table even in their textbooks, students have to ask their classmates the question, how do you travel to school? And note in these in a table like this, note the name and the mode of transport that the friend uses. So in this way, you can maximize some speaking in the classroom and perhaps support these students by giving them some of this language in advance. Perhaps the question that has to be framed. How do you travel to school? And as an answer, I travel by bus, I travel by bicycle. Based on their answers, the student will mark or fill up this table. You could also think of some activities as ranking activities, something similar that you did in the pyramid discussion. You could give them a situation. Say, for example, students have to travel somewhere in their holidays. What are some of the things that you would pack? So you could give them a list of 10 items for packing and ask students to discuss this in groups and decide what are the 5 most important things that you will need to travel to your native place or to a place that you want to visit. Is there any other technique that you use in your classrooms? If yes, could you please type that in the chat for us? A brainstorming activity, yes. Okay. Simple questions can help learn English, yes. Oh, there are some really nice suggestions here. Mr. Subramanyam SA says running dictation, speaking out loud also. Okay.
There's some spelling game and memory testing game on chat.
Okay, so that's these are some techniques that you use in your classroom. Fantastic. And do you do that in groups or pairs? Okay.
Quiz.
Oh yes, quizzes. Quizzes can be done as a pair activity. You can also do the quiz in the through the technique, the ball throwing technique that I talked about, and also the onion ring technique. Great. That's fantastic. Moving on. Have you ever thought about making how we could make reading a more communicative activity? Now, here is a statement about reading, that reading can open a lot of possibilities for communication. Please take a minute to read the statement and let us know in the chat whether you disagree, whether you agree or disagree with this statement. So on your screens, there is a statement about reading. We want you to read that and let us know whether you agree or disagree. Okay, to I think one of my previous questions, I can see Mr. Naveen Kumar has answered that we can use this method in history too. Thank you. I believe that would be perhaps for the pyramid discussion that we just talked about. Oh, there are some really interesting.
The question.
Sorry, Haima.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a couple of yes and agreed from a few participants.
Okay, great. Yes, and so now we will see how we could make reading a more communicative activity. Since we tend to read a lot of texts, not just in our English lessons, but also for some of our other subjects. So this is a text from a class 5 textbook from Maharashtra. It's called My English Book 5. Are you all aware of the stages of reading? There are three stages of reading: pre-reading, while reading, and post-reading. I happened to see a Karnataka state textbook a while ago, which I think has the English book for class 6 had a pre-reading section. But the question here is, can we make this pre-reading section more communicative? Can each stage of reading be made more communicative? Okay. Now, in the pre-reading stage, before they actually read the text, you could set the context. You can get students to work in pairs and predict what this text could be about. They can do this by looking at the title of the text or looking at some of the pictures, like in the slide that I just shared. By looking at those pictures, students can talk to each other and tell them, I think this could be a lesson about trees. I think this could be a lesson about the weather, etc. You could also pre-teach the vocabulary to your students, something that I think some of your state textbooks already do. Now, while reading, there are some reading strategies that we usually employ. We sometimes skim the text, that is just reading quickly for gist, for understanding what is the main idea behind the text that we are reading. We also sometimes scan the text. We scan the text to find some information that we are looking for, perhaps an answer to a question in the end that's asked in the end. Or we read for detail, perhaps for further discussion of the text itself. Now, how can these be made more communicative? Now, I have put down some suggestions that can be used. The first one is called jigsaw reading. Jigsaw reading gets its name, from the puzzle that we have, where you have to put the pieces of a puzzle together. So we have given this name to this kind of activity, which we call jigsaw reading. For example, you divide the text into two parts and give pairs of student one part of the text. So if you have a pair of students, you will give student A one text and you could give a related task with that text to student A. Student B will get another text and a task related to that. So the student A will complete their task, so will student B. The teacher will then put them in another group where he or she will discuss the text that she had with with the other student A of another pair. This is so that they discuss the text together and clarify their understanding of the text that they got. Similarly, student B's will get together in their pairs and discuss the text and the task in detail. In the end, the teacher will bring student A and student B back together, where they both will present to each other the text that they got, what they understood from it, and the task that they have done. this way making the activity a communicative one. You can also do a running dictation. I think I saw somebody mention that in the chat. Running dictation is, say, for example, you have a gap fill activity, what we also call fill in the gap activity. So student A is the reader who looks at this gap fill. The teacher would have put the answers to the gap fill, say, around the classroom on the walls. Student B, the partner, will run around the room looking for the correct text to fill in the gap. So student B finds the correct word, comes back and gives it to student A, who fits it in the text to complete the activity. So this is one way where students not only communicate. As you can see, there is it's a kind of a stirrer activity where they also get become active and do things together. As a post-reading activity, it could be a speaking activity or it could even be a writing activity. Say students can do a role play of the text that they have just read, especially if they have been stories. They can do quizzes together. They can do the text perhaps as an interview. Two students can also, either two students or maybe a group of 3 or 4 can get together and discuss the text. So for example, if it is a story, an activity that students can do is writing a new ending to the story. Of course, this will depend on the level of the students. This you could probably do with children at the secondary level. So you could give them the task of discussing together and writing a new ending to the story. So we discussed some techniques for maximizing spoken interaction in your classrooms. What could be some possible challenges and can we think of any solutions for that? Now on your screens, you will read some statements that teachers have shared about pair and group work. Please read these statements carefully and let us know whether you agree or disagree with some of them. And if you could possibly tell us in the chat about why you agree or disagree. In the first statement, a teacher has shared that it is difficult to use pair and group work in large classes. What do you think? I can see that some of you have said that you also do many pair and group activities. So do you agree with this? Okay, I can see many of you have talked about. Okay, I can see some suggestions of story reading activity that Mr. Rohidas Joglekar has shared. Yeah, thank you for that. Right. So for this statement, where many teachers have shared that they find it difficult to do pair and group activities um, in their classrooms. Uh, yes, it can be a challenge, we agree. But sometimes when you can plan this well and also give very clear instructions for this, this can actually work in larger classrooms. Uh, if you see some of the techniques that we talked about, by doing those techniques, you will get participation from a larger number of students, and it can actually make it more interactive. Some teachers have also shared that the pair and group activities may benefit only the strong learners. So statement number 2. Okay, for statement 1, I can see some responses where someone has said it's easy because we could make many pairs. Absolutely. Okay, so some of you talking about reading tasks here. Okay. Now, pair and group work can benefit all learners, whether strong or weak, if we plan this activity in such a way that we are able to pair them, say, strong and weak together, where we give specific roles for the strong learner on how she or he could help the others in a group. So this way, all the learners can benefit from these techniques, and the strong learners and learners also learn to become more responsible. A third statement from teachers is about that the pair and group activities can maximize opportunities for students to speak in English. I think I could see some of your responses here in the chat, where many of you had agreed with this, that it does, that pair work does maximize opportunities for speaking English. Okay, I also see a response here about the first one, I think, where they have said that it depends upon the teacher. Okay, someone has shared that it is easy in large classes because we can make small groups, I think, and ask the students to finish. Okay, yes, very clear instructions can work. A fourth statement is that it is not necessary to plan pair and group work. Do you think this is possible? And does it work in your classes? Do you plan your pair and group activities? Is it important that we plan them? Okay. Another benefit of pair and group work someone has shared is that even idle kids tend to listen. Yes, and not only that, I also feel that when we do pair and group work, it also students who are shy tend to speak more with their peers than they would if it is just an interaction with the teacher. So it encourages shy learners as well. Okay, some of you saying 3 agree. Okay, so I think many teachers have this problem. They feel sometimes they think that if a noisy classroom during pair and group activities is a sign that no learning is happening. How many of you believe, agree with statement 5? We are looking at statement 5 now, where teachers have shared that a noisy classroom means that no learning is happening. In a lot of instances, these noisy classrooms during pair and group work is because students are discussing, they are experimenting with the language that they have been given. And so it is actually good noise that you hear. So in my opinion, this noise is actually the noise of students who are interacting and using language. Right. And one of the ways in which for the fourth statement, it is necessary to plan because the teacher not only has to plan which activity she or he would do as a pair or a group work activity, they also have to plan some very clear instructions. Students need to know what is the role that they are playing in a pair work or a group work. They also, the teachers need to know that when they have pair and group work, they should also go around the classroom at that time and monitor the work that is happening. Are students following the instructions that you have given? Have they understood the instructions that have been given? Sometimes you may notice that a lot of students are not doing the activity as you had instructed. So perhaps you may have to pause the activity and give the instructions again. So these are some things that you have to think about when you plan these activities. Okay. We have some responses. Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar. You say that you agree because everyone is given equal opportunity. Fantastic, absolutely. Yes, they can. Some learners can watch the stronger learners and learn from them. Thank you for that, Mr. Shivananda. Right. So this brings us to the end of today's presentation. Thank you all for your fantastic participation and your responses in the chat today. We will now take some questions that you may have. If you have any additional questions, please type them in the chat now. Okay, I can see many, some of you saying statement 5 you don't agree with. Any questions, any more questions for us, please? Any questions on the techniques that we shared with you? Anu, are there any questions in Kannada that you can?
No, nothing specific that I can see. Although there was a very broad question by Aishwarya a little earlier in the chat about what exactly is communication. So while we're waiting for questions to come in, maybe you can just say a few things about communication.
Right.
Communication.
Well, that's a very broad term, communication, but it can have many aspects to it. So in the in a classroom setting, it's about being able to say, for example, ask any question and ask and answer questions. Communication in the wider sense, when we step out of the classroom, is when you have the confidence again to find some information that you want, and or if someone asks you a question, you are able to convey it so that the meaning is very clear. So that is communication. And the most important thing that we need for communication is a language through which we can communicate. It's about being able to make the other person also understand what you are trying to convey. Uh, and also the other way around, like, the other person should be able to convey this question to you clearly and meaningfully. Okay. I can see that many of you do agree that pair and group work is helpful. And I'm hoping that you are able, that some of these techniques today are already perhaps being used by you, or you could also, now that you have heard them, you could use them in your classrooms. Yes, I agree with you, Vijay Lakshmi ma'am, that sometimes teachers do struggle to handle crowded classrooms. It is not at all easy when classrooms are as big as 50 or 60 students. But if you take these small steps and introduce pair and group work, slowly you will see that they get used to some this method of interaction. And slowly you will see that it will also work in your large classrooms. But it's a practice that you should continue in your classrooms. You have to be patient and stick with it and continue with it as much as possible.
Sujata, there's a question from Mr. Subramaniam. I'm wondering if you can read it. Can you see the question? Suppose the Subramaniam SA.
Has it come up just now?
Yeah, so
Yes.
it says, suppose students have inferiority complex about pronouncing the word or using English or language. What's your suggestion for overcoming this?
Right, I would say students are shy in using English. This is a fact in our classrooms. So some ways in which we can support them is by, it's okay to use the mother tongue in your classrooms. So especially when you want to make the meaning understood, you can use some amount of the mother tongue with English, so that the student feels confident that it's okay to sometimes mix your mother tongue with English, if that is the case. So if you encourage them slowly, this is also called trans-languaging, for example. If you encourage them to take these steps slowly, they will become more confident in the use of English, and perhaps be speaking up the word that they want to. You may, of course, have to perhaps, correct their pronunciations from time to time. But the first step is to encourage them to speak at all. So for doing that, speaking in the mother tongue or supporting English through mother tongue is very important. So when students do respond to you, for example, in say half Kannada and half English, you should not dismiss such a student or their answer. You should accept it, and perhaps in your error correction, tell them how they could say that perhaps completely in English. So when these techniques are tried in with students in their groups, you see that some of this shyness that they have may recede and they may open up a little bit more with their peers and finally with you as a teacher.
There is a comment that has just come in from Mr. Shivananda. It says, I strongly disagree that noisy classroom is not a sign of learning, because if the students are involved in discussing, they may come out with new ideas, as well as keeping quiet is not a way of learning. So and it's just a comment that he's put in. So.
Oh, it's a fantastic comment. Thank you for that. I completely agree with you, sir. A noisy classroom is definitely not a sign that learning is not happening. It is actually the other way around. Completely agree with you. Thank you for that, sir. And also where pronunciation is concerned, I think this was something that was tackled in the first session, Anu, if I'm not wrong, about teachers improving their own English speaking skills.
Yes.
And there was a focus on pronunciation, right?
That's right, there was.
And a focus on drilling methods.
There were methods specified in the first session, yes.
Okay, so if you are aware, or there are these methods of drilling that we use for pronunciation, say repeating the word as an entire group, or what we call choral drilling. You could also use alternate drills where you repeat the word or question and answer. So one group, if you have divided your class into two groups, one group just speaks the question in English, the other answers in English. But this is after the teacher has drilled how they can say the sentence with the correct pronunciation in English. So there are drilling techniques that you could use. And for these techniques, you could go on the Teaching English website of the British Council, and there are many articles and also videos on how to do choral drilling or alternate drilling with your students.
There is one question that's come, which is how, basically how to support strong and slow learners. I mean, if there are any tips on supporting strong learners and slow learners in the classroom.
As a teacher, it is important to know each of your learners, know more in advance. All our classes tend to be mixed ability classes. So in the planning that you do for your lessons, you have to plan some activities for learners. So perhaps the question has to be worded in a different way for a learner to understand. So you have to think of these techniques for learners who may not be at the same level as, say, the rest of the class. But every activity that you plan, say, for example, there were some suggestions in the chat about pairing the strong and shy learners. That is something that could work with learners like this. But when teachers are planning activities or questions or tasks for the students, they should keep this in mind and have some tasks that cater to this segment of students.
I guess that's it, Sujata. We've come to the end. You may want to just give your closing remarks and close the session.
Yeah. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming to the session today. I would I hope some of the techniques that we have talked about are useful in your classrooms. Also, I would like to remind you tomorrow's session is about your own professional development. It is about navigating your professional development journey, and it will be presented by my colleague Rebecca again, whom you met on day 2. In this session, we will focus on some of the resources that we have, free online resources that the British Council offers. So I'm sure some of the questions that you have asked in this session and also in some of our previous sessions might be answered through the session that we have tomorrow, because you can see what are some of the resources that we have to offer.
Thank you. Thank you, Sujata.
Yeah, thank you very much. And all the best.